Peg is a door-to-door saleswoman in a small town, and her daily job is to sell cosmetics to her neighbors. Most of the time, however, she gets turned away, and not a single person in the entire town is willing to buy anything. With the threat of losing her job hanging over her head, Peg is deeply troubled. Then she notices an old castle on the hill through her rearview mirror. Because of rumors that it is haunted, none of the townspeople dare go near it. But Peg can no longer afford to worry about that. Whoever lives in a castle must be wealthy. Determined to save her job, she gathers her courage and steps through the iron gate. To her surprise, the inside of the castle grounds is completely different from the desolate exterior. The garden is filled with carefully maintained and beautifully trimmed plants. This only strengthens Peg's belief. Suddenly, she feels someone watching her from a window, but no one answers the door. Left with no choice, Peg pushes the door open and enters on her own. The very next second, a chill runs down her spine. The castle is eerily empty, covered in dust and cobwebs. She follows the only staircase upward and finds nothing but a badly damaged roof. Then she notices a figure hiding in a corner. This person is likely the owner of the castle, but she quickly realizes he is not an ordinary human. His hands are made entirely of scissors. After talking with him for a while, Peg senses no malice in him at all. She even gently wipes the wounds on Edward's face. Edward has not felt such kindness in a very long time. Under Peg's guidance, he leaves the castle for the first time. As he looks down at the colorful world below the hill, a smile slowly spreads across his face. He excitedly waves his scissor hands around, startling Peg. Edward is as thrilled as a child. Peg takes Edward home with her. The moment he enters, he can hardly believe his eyes. The house is small, yet incredibly warm. It feels like a completely different world from the castle on the hill. Pointing at family photos, Peg introduces her family to Edward, her loving husband, and her adorable son. But Edward's eyes remain fixed on one particular photograph. He has never seen such a beautiful girl before. She is Peg's daughter, Kim. The family of 4 lives a happy life together. Unfortunately, Kim is away camping with her friends and will not return for a few days. Peg enthusiastically shows Edward every room in the house and gives him a set of her husband's old clothes to change into. But Edward becomes fascinated by the mirror in Kim's room. He reaches out to touch the person inside it, only to accidentally cut his face again. He also pokes a hole in the soft and comfortable waterbed. Panicking, he quickly covers it with a stuffed toy. Without proper hands, even the simplest tasks are difficult for Edward. With Peg's help, he finally puts on the first set of clothes of his life. Dinner proves just as challenging. Unable to use a knife and fork, he struggles so much that everyone stares in amazement as he tries to eat a single pea. Fortunately, Peg's husband and son do not reject him. For Edward, tasting food for the first time is pure bliss. That night, Peg lets him sleep in Kim's room temporarily. Afraid of puncturing the waterbed again, Edward spends the entire night holding his scissor hands against his chest. The townspeople live highly predictable lives. The men leave for work at dawn and do not return until nightfall. The women stay behind to take care of the household. With plenty of free time, the housewives spend their days gossiping. News that Peg has brought home a strange man quickly becomes the hottest topic in town. They rush to tell one another and gather outside the house, eager to see Edward for themselves. But even by evening, Peg refuses to let Edward go outside. His face is covered with scars, and she hopes makeup can help hide them. Unfortunately, nothing seems to work. With nothing else to do, Edward wanders into the backyard and notices Mr. Peg trimming the hedges. The work is progressing painfully slowly, so Edward decides to help. By the time Mr. Peg realizes what is happening, Edward has already transformed the messy bushes into the shape of a dinosaur. Mr. Peg simply lies back and relaxes, leaving the entire yard in Edward's hands. Before long, Edward creates another masterpiece, a family of 4, sculpted from hedges. Peg is thrilled, but someone secretly slips into the yard. A self-proclaimed psychic calls Edward a demon. The neighbors immediately crowd around the entrance. They refuse to leave until they see Edward. Left with no choice, Peg agrees to hold a party to welcome him. Looking at a machine used to cut open cans, Edward is reminded of the past. Back then, the castle was not falling apart. Its owner was an elderly inventor. He was brilliant beyond measure. Unable to do physical labor because of his age, he created countless automated machines. Every day, they produced delicious food entirely on their own. Edward began as one of those machines, a robot designed to chop vegetables. Perhaps the inventor could no longer bear the loneliness of living alone in the castle. One day, he had an extraordinary idea. He gave Edward both a body and a soul. Through books, he taught him human knowledge, kindness, and compassion. Yet he never told Edward what the outside world was like. Maybe he was disappointed by it, or maybe he simply did not want Edward to get hurt. Even so, Edward could always feel the inventor's love for life. The inventor's pure and untainted eyes often appear in Edward's dreams. Soon, Edward's welcome party arrives as planned. People from all over town come to see him. Everyone is fascinated by this unusual newcomer, but Edward has frightening scissor hands. He is also painfully shy and struggles to communicate. He cannot even understand their jokes. All he can do is smile awkwardly along with them. An elderly disabled man approaches and comforts him. He says his disability never stopped him from living a fulfilling life and encourages Edward not to lose heart. Among all the guests, Joyce is by far the most enthusiastic. She eagerly feeds Edward spoonfuls of ice cream. She even repeatedly invites him to visit her house alone. Fortunately, Mr. Peg appears just in time to save him from the awkward situation. To Edward, the world outside the castle feels incredibly complicated. That very night, Kim unexpectedly returns home early. She has no idea there is a new guest in the house. The moment she sees Edward, she screams in terror and runs away. Edward is startled as well. In panic, he accidentally turns the waterbed into a fountain. The misunderstanding throws the entire house into chaos. Peg blames no one. Instead, she introduces Kim and Edward properly. The instant the girl he admires appears before him, Edward becomes so overwhelmed that he faints on the spot. After that, Edward becomes a local celebrity. He goes from house to house trimming hedges free of charge. Thanks to him, the entire town begins to look different. Edward even accompanies Peg's son to school and shows off his remarkable talents to the students. Gradually, everyone starts accepting him. Still, the happiest part of Edward's day is seeing Kim. He shouts her name whenever he sees her. His way of expressing affection is clumsy but sincere. Unfortunately, it makes Kim's new boyfriend uncomfortable. Jim immediately sees Edward as a rival. He deliberately wraps his arms around Kim right in front of him. At that moment, Edward feels something he cannot understand. He has never experienced jealousy before. One evening, Jim and his friends come over to visit. During dinner, Mr. Peg warns Edward that he should not keep helping everyone for free forever. Otherwise, the same people who praise him now may resent him once he stops. While they are talking, Edward picks up a piece of steak and tries to offer it to Kim, but he becomes nervous. The steak slips from his scissors and lands directly on Kim's brand new dress. Jim bursts out laughing. The next day, while trimming hedges, Edward notices a shaggy poodle nearby. Suddenly, he gets an idea. With a rapid series of precise snips, the scruffy dog is transformed into a stylish show poodle. The town goes crazy. Women crowd into Peg's backyard, unwilling to miss the chance to have their pets groomed by Edward. Joyce reacts the fastest. Seeing how incredible his skills are, she even asks him to give her a new hairstyle. Edward never knows how to refuse anyone, so he immediately gets to work. But Joyce behaves strangely. Even though it is only a haircut, she becomes unusually excited. She declares it the most unforgettable experience of her life. Before long, Edward becomes the town's favorite hairstylist. No matter what style people request, his skillful scissor hands can make it happen. Even a company executive calls to ask about experiencing a haircut from the famous scissor-handed stylist. As a result, Peg's job is finally secure. Kim begins to see Edward in a whole new light. The next day, Edward accompanies the executive to a shopping mall. There, he witnesses something that fills him with envy. Kim is embracing her boyfriend. They look so happy together. Edward wonders what it feels like to hold someone you truly love. Sometime later, Edward receives an invitation to appear on television. Viewers ask him many questions. Would he consider opening a beauty salon? Does he enjoy life outside the castle? Edward answers every question with surprising confidence. But when someone asks whether he likes a particular girl, he suddenly falls silent. He simply stares into the camera. It seems as though he knows Kim is watching from the other side of the screen. Then, in the next moment, an electrical shock causes his scissor hands to malfunction, and he collapses to the floor. Jim laughs loudly at the sight. Kim, however, feels nothing but concern. After Edward's television appearance, Joyce cannot stop thinking about him. She rents a beauty salon downtown and offers him a position as the head stylist. At first, Edward has no interest in the idea, but Joyce promises to provide Peg with a good job opportunity as well. Only then does Edward agree. Unfortunately, Joyce has ulterior motives. She leads Edward into a private room. Then she suddenly pushes him onto a reclining chair. Soft, romantic music plays from the radio. The atmosphere becomes increasingly uncomfortable. As Joyce begins taking off her clothes, Edward is terrified. He immediately runs out of the salon. Panicked, Edward searches everywhere and eventually finds Peg's family at a restaurant. He honestly tells them everything that just happened. The entire family is left speechless in shock. Mr. Peg, however, thinks they were lucky nothing worse happened. At the very least, Edward has learned a few things about the world. Hoping to help Edward become financially independent, Peg takes him to a bank to apply for a loan. With the money, he could open his own salon and finally have a stable job. But Edward does not even have a social security number. As far as the system is concerned, he does not exist. The bank immediately rejects the application. Frustrated, Peg can only take him home. Meanwhile, Jim has plans of his own. One day, after forgetting his keys, he watches Edward effortlessly unlock a door without leaving a single scratch. That is when an idea forms in his mind. He wants Edward to break into his parents' house and open their safe. Jim knows exactly how much Edward likes Kim. He claims the money belongs to his parents anyway. Even if they get caught, his parents will never blame him. Once they have the cash, he says, he will buy a car, take everyone on adventures, and reward all of his friends. Although Kim strongly objects, she eventually gives in to Jim's relentless pressure. While Jim's parents are away on vacation, the group puts the plan into motion that very night. Watching Kim walk ahead of him, Edward does not think twice. He easily unlocks the front door. Just when success seems within reach, Jim pushes Edward into the room first. The next second, the security system activates. Alarms begin blaring. Every door and window instantly locks shut. Edward desperately tries to open the door, but his scissor hands cannot even grip the handle properly. The others panic and flee. Kim wants to go back and help him escape. Instead, Jim throws her over his shoulder and drives away. The police arrive shortly after hearing the alarm. They order Edward to raise his hands and surrender. When he lifts his scissor hands, the police chief mistakes them for weapons. He is moments away from opening fire. Fortunately, neighbors arrive just in time to stop him. Otherwise, Edward might have lost his life right there. Peg is overwhelmed with guilt. She feels responsible because she has always talked about money around him. When asked whether anyone instructed him to commit the crime, Edward remains silent. He refuses to betray anyone. After being examined by a psychologist, it is determined that years of isolation have severely weakened his ability to distinguish right from wrong. The police chief patiently speaks with him and eventually releases him. But the rumors only grow worse. The same women who once enjoyed Edward's free services now treat him like a problem. The town's self-proclaimed psychic seizes the opportunity to turn people against him. Joyce goes even further. To cover up her own failed seduction, she falsely claims Edward tried to force himself on her. Reporters begin gathering outside Peg's house every day. Edward is deeply troubled. He cannot understand what he did wrong. The people who once welcomed him are now attacking him from every direction. Filled with guilt, Kim apologizes to Edward. She blames herself for hiding the truth, but Edward does not blame her at all. Furious, Kim finally sees Jim for who he really is and becomes deeply disappointed in him. She wants to talk to Edward but does not know how to begin. Before long, Christmas arrives. Hoping to clear up the misunderstandings surrounding Edward, Peg decides to host another party. She wants everyone to sit down and settle things face to face. Meanwhile, Mr. Peg installs white decorations on the roof to imitate snow. The town celebrates Christmas every year, but it has never actually snowed there. Suddenly, Kim thinks she sees something outside. Without realizing it, she walks toward the door. Snowflakes drift through the air. They are not real snow. Edward is carving an ice sculpture with his scissor hands. Kim begins dancing beneath the falling ice crystals. Then Jim suddenly appears. Edward does not notice him and accidentally cuts Kim. Jim immediately seizes the opportunity and angrily drives Edward away. But Kim believes her boyfriend is overreacting. Unable to tolerate him any longer, she breaks up with him. Jim storms off in rage. Edward has nowhere to release the pain in his heart. In anger, he tears apart his clothes. He destroys sculptures and damages cars as he wanders through the neighborhood. The neighbors quickly call the police. Soon, the police chief arrives. The women gather together, condemning Edward's behavior and demanding protection. At the same time, Peg's family searches everywhere for him. What they do not know is that Edward is sitting alone by the roadside. He can trim a dog's tangled fur and help it see the world clearly, yet he cannot make people see the goodness inside him. Suddenly, blinding lights appear. The moment Edward sees the police, he runs. With nowhere else to go, he eventually returns home. To his surprise, Kim is waiting there. Edward wants to hold her tightly, but he is afraid he will hurt her again. Kim is not afraid at all. They embrace each other. The moment brings back memories of the previous Christmas. Back then, the inventor had prepared a brand new pair of hands for Edward. Once attached, he would finally be able to live like a normal person. But before Edward could receive them, the inventor collapsed in front of him. The hands were damaged as well. Edward tried desperately to wake him. Instead, he accidentally cut the inventor's face. Suddenly, Edward senses danger. Kim's younger brother is walking home. At the same time, Jim and his friends are driving around drunk. The car is about to hit the boy. Without hesitation, Edward dives forward and saves him. Desperate to check whether the boy is hurt, Edward accidentally cuts his face. To anyone watching, however, it looks as though Edward is attacking him. Neighbors rush forward to help. Several of them are cut as well. Edward has no idea how to explain himself. Panic spreads instantly. Kim tries to tell everyone the truth, but Jim stops her. Fortunately, Peg arrives in time. Everything should have ended there. But Jim refuses to let the opportunity slip away. He tackles Edward to the ground and begins beating him mercilessly. No one dares intervene. Before long, Jim is slashed by Edward's sharp blades. Blood pours from the wound. In front of the entire town, Edward is instantly branded a monster. Kim realizes Edward can never stay in town again. Now they must say goodbye. As hateful insults rain down around them, Edward is driven away in a police car. A gunshot echoes through the night. The police chief stands at the foot of the hill. He has not killed Edward. Instead, He decides Edward has returned to the place where he belongs. As far as he is concerned, the matter is over. The townspeople disagree. They are determined to see Edward dead. A mob forms and marches toward the castle. Realizing disaster is coming, Kim races up the hill as fast as she can. Edward sits alone on his small bed, surrounded by a loneliness beyond words. Kim begs him to run, but the next second, Jim bursts in with a stolen gun and starts firing wildly. The second shot is about to hit Edward. Kim desperately throws herself toward him. At that moment, part of the house suddenly collapses. Jim charges forward and kicks Edward to the ground. Then he grabs an iron bar and attacks him viciously. Edward never fights back. He doesn't want to hurt anyone ever again. To keep Edward from being beaten to death, Kim grabs a nearby stick and strikes Jim down. But her kindness becomes a weakness. Jim seizes the opportunity and knocks her to the ground. Edward cannot tolerate seeing Kim hurt. He drives a scissor blade into Jim's stomach. At last, Jim pays the price for everything he has done. But Edward has now killed a man with his own hands. The townspeople finally arrive and see Jim's body. They are furious, yet terrified at the same time. Kim looks at Edward and doesn't know what to do. Now all they can do is say goodbye with a kiss. And just like that, Edward watches the only person he has ever loved leave him forever. Before leaving, Kim suddenly gets an idea. She takes one of the Scissorhands from the assembly line and tells everyone that Edward died in the mansion. Only then does the town's anger finally subside. After that, no one ever approaches the mansion again. No one ever hears another word about Edward. Many years pass. Kim grows old. She tells this story to her granddaughter and never stops believing that Edward is still alive. Because ever since then, the town that never knew snow has been blanketed in snowfall every Christmas. She believes it is Edward's scissor hands dancing through the air, carving sweet memories from ice.